we're at our regional conference. At the time, Phil Strout was our regional leader, and we're just kind of telling him what happened. And he just looked us in the eyes and he said, you guys need to learn to have a soft heart and tough skin. Soft heart and tough skin. That statement never left us. And the other thing that he had said is that you need to learn to hold people with open hands. And so what that means, and if you could see me right now, I've got my hands open with my fingers spread. And when you hold people with open hands, they will slip out a lot easier. You're not holding on tight to them where it's going to hurt both you and them when it's time for them to move on. And so that image as well has always been very foundational for us.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow in life with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathick, National Director for Vineyard USA, talks with Christina Lowery, the Associate National Director for Church Health and Development. Let's listen in.
Well, Christina, excited to talk to you. Thanks for making some time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
it's good to be here.
Yeah, it should be fun. And so tell us a little bit about where you're from, what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
A little bit about you.
Yeah, I grew up in Virginia, in Manassas, Virginia, which if you're a Civil War history buff, lots of Civil War. No.
Nope, I'm not. But I'd like to pretend like I am right now, just with you.
There was a north side and a south side.
Okay,
yeah.
Good starting point.
Very historic area, pretty close to Washington, D.C.,
Yep.
and just it's a very interesting area to grow up in. I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were born again and filled with the Holy Spirit actually in the Catholic Church. There was a massive charismatic renewal going on in the 70s during the Jesus movement and just a radical salvation. And they ended up eventually at a Baptist church is what they like to call it. And so that's the church that I was raised in and was there for all the way into my young 20s. And so
in Manassas?
In Manassas, yep.
Oh, that's interesting.
And yeah, that's actually where I met my husband, Joel, in the preschool room of this little church in Manassas, Virginia. And so we've known each other our whole lives from this church.
Please tell me there's pictures of the two of you together.
There are actually.
Are there really?
Yes.
From preschool?
From preschool, I don't know about preschool. I have one of my favorite pictures is at a church picnic, and we're in one of those relay races. I am killing it. Like we're doing a wheelbarrow race, and I am beating him.
Yes.
So I'm so glad that we have that.
I think I now know why
documented.
That's one of your favorite pictures.
Yes.
Got it. Good. Okay.
So.
And then they were they raised Catholic?
My dad was Italian family. My mom was raised Nazarene, and but they were both very nominal in their faith at that point.
Okay. So they're going to a Catholic church just because.
So the story goes is that they weren't going to church on a regular basis. My mom actually got saved in a hotel room in the middle of the night. She was contemplating suicide, and she found a Gideon Bible.
Wow.
And just a classic story. She opened the Bible, and whatever verse it was that she read, it was exactly what she needed to hear. And then she flipped to the back of the Bible and prayed the prayer of salvation based on what was there in the Bible. So she didn't really know much about going to church, and so she would go to my dad's Catholic church, and there happened to be this filled with the Holy Spirit Catholic priest that she was just loving it. So she brought Dad, and one night the Catholic priest was walking around the circle, and every time he touched someone's head, they would just start speaking in tongues. And so my dad's story is that, so my dad was not, he would not call himself saved at that point or given his life to Jesus, but the priest is walking around, he lays a hand on my mom's head, and she just starts speaking in tongues. And then the priest looks at my dad, and my dad looks up and he says, I don't think I'm ready for this. And then the priest lays his hands on my dad, and he just immediately started speaking in tongues.
Ready or not.
And yeah. So my dad says, I got saved and filled with the Holy Spirit at the same time.
Wow.
So yeah.
Those Gideons, man, like.
I know.
How many people have those folks touched? You know, like for me in campus, they would be there handing out Bibles at Ohio State. And then, of course, in hotels.
Yep.
They're always in hotels.
Yep.
Little sneak peek, interesting thing. If you've not checked the Bibles in hotels, there's often money in them.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, see, as a Gideon, so my dad actually ended up becoming a Gideon because
Did he really?
Because of Mom's story, and she actually used to travel for the Gideons and tell her story at their conferences and everything. So Dad became a Gideon. So growing up as a Gideon's child, anytime I'm in a hotel, I pull that Bible out and open it up, at least for the maids to see.
That's so great.
I've never found money, though, so now I'm really disappointed.
I have multiple times, yeah.
Man.
Somebody told me that, and do I take it every time? I don't know. Intrigue, mystery. I'm not saying. Okay, so you're raised in this Baptist-costal thing.
Yeah.
You and Joel meet each other in preschool. You're killing him in wheelbarrow races at church picnics.
And sword drills.
And sword drills. Oh, goodness. Yeah. Okay, for those that are not initiated, I only know this because I'm married to a church kid who would do sword drills. For those, and I would have known otherwise.
Right.
For those that don't know what a sword drill is, what is a sword drill?
So they would have the kids like sitting around a table, and you would hold your Bible upright with your thumbs like on the pages, could not open it. And then your teacher would call out a verse, and you would rip through the Bible and find that verse and read it. And then, And
if you could read it first.
It was just a competition. So then people will get at, So we go up against different people.
So wait, see, this is a different, I'm going to look like a church kid now because I know something else. I thought that you held the sword drill above your head because like sometimes.
I have seen that before, but we didn't.
Because if you held it in your lap, you could start cheating.
Well, we didn't put it on our lap. It was always on the table.
On the table. Yes. You can't be touching it.
Right.
Okay. Fair enough. Because then you could kind of put your thumb
Well, you didn't know the verse.
But you could have more than one spot. You could be like, okay, I'm going to put like my pointer finger at Psalms. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, or it's a New Testament break, and then and you kind of like preset, like the way a magician does with a deck of cards. Anyway, okay, okay. So you're like a church.
I'm a church kid.
You're doing sword drills. You're a Baptist-costal.
Yep.
You're. What did you just say? I'm a child of the Gideons.
Yes.
I think is how you just said
Gideon's
it.
kid. Yeah.
Gideon's kid. Wow. Okay. So all that's happening all through high school. You know, I assume you start dating Joel sometime in high school.
No.
What?
Joel was like a brother for a long time. Joel knew all my boyfriends. Like, he was friends with them. There were times that, I'm not kidding you, there were times that I would go out with my boyfriend with Joel and some other kids from the church, and I had a very early curfew, so they'd drop me off at home, and then they'd all go out together. It was very common, So
shout out to the old boyfriends, anybody listening. Okay, so
there weren't that many, okay?
I saw lines of it in my mind when you said it. So so you don't date in high school. You date.
I had one formal boyfriend in high school, and then in college,
See, now you're really setting the record straight. Yeah. Okay, so then when do you start dating Joel?
After college.
Oh, okay.
And even that is a story. He was my best friend. In fact, we went to an Acquire the Fire youth conference with our youth group when we were seniors in high school. And I would say both of us were kind of living the faith of our parents up until that point. That conference just wrecked our lives. Like, in fact, I would say from that point on, our lives have never been the same. That shared experience, we just became best friends. That's another reason why Joel knew the many boyfriends. No, there were just a few. He knew all the boyfriends. In fact, he was very instrumental in me breaking up with the last boyfriend before him.
Wow.
And it really was just a kind of an accountability best friend brother, talk that he was just kind of like, something's got to change. And so anyway, all through college, Joel had been encouraging me to date God for a year, not to date any of these guys that just, like want one thing and blah, blah, blah. And I'd always say, yeah, Joel, like, okay, yeah, sure. But when I broke up with the last one, I knew that, okay, I'm giving God a year and I'm going to date God. He is going to be truly the lover of my soul. This last relationship had completely depleted me spiritually. I was Christian my whole life, but I was probably as far away from God as I could be at that point, and just sad and depressed and lost. And that year with God, he just restored. I mean, that phrase restored my soul. I mean, that is exactly what happened. And my quiet times were just 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours long, just spending time with God and letting, not just me praying to him, but hearing from him, hearing his voice. And so meanwhile, Joel and I graduated from college in that year.
Where'd you go to college?
No one's ever heard of it. It's a small school in North Carolina.
Okay.
Chowan University.
Chowan?
Which is an there's a local river, the Chowan River, which is an Indian, like a Native American river. Anyway, small Baptist school that I ended up at. And so anyway, I graduated from college, started teaching. I was a music teacher. And Joel and I, again, were best friends. And there was kind of like this tension that I was feeling in that he was the man that I would think I would want to marry, but I didn't feel those feelings for him. And it was frustrating. It was crazy because randomly I went to sleep one night and I had this dream that he came up to me and told me that he loved me. And when I woke up the next morning, it was like God had flipped a light switch. And he said, Joel's the one. And it was not just like informational, like Joel's the one. It was like all of a sudden I realized I am in love with Joel Lowery. We had not dated. We're just hanging out like we always had. And about a week later, I told him about my dream and the rest was history.
Wow.
So yeah.
So light switch flipped at the same time. Or maybe his was sooner, he just didn't tell you.
That probably a little bit of that. But
That's okay. It's more romantic story.
Yeah.
Simultaneously.
Oh, right.
You just fell for each other. That's what
it was pretty cool. It really was. It was like a light switch, and the rest was history. We were engaged 6 months later, and married six months after that. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And then just because I know a good bit of your story, you guys then end up. Did you go right to Texas?
No, I taught for 3 years, and then we moved to Texas.
Okay. And what did you teach?
Music.
Oh.
Elementary music.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you do that, and then you go to Texas and talk about what that move was.
Yeah, we moved to Texas to work for Teen Mania Ministries. It's a youth, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was a youth ministry that had a very large internship of college-age students, about 600, 650 students there. That was called the Honor Academy. And then we also had a big arm was summer missions trips. Most summers we would send 2,000 or 3,000 kids all over the world, teenagers all over the world on missions. All these kids would come to campus and we'd train them in a drama or some kind of evangelistic method, and then we'd send them off all around the world.
Wow.
And then the other piece was the Acquire the Fire youth conventions, which that's where Joel and I, where God wrecked us and our life's never been the same. So we felt we owed a lot to the ministry. And so I was an event planner for their Honor Academy. And Joel, he oversaw all of the second year interns. So, so it was an incredible experience. Nothing but incredible, good, forming. I don't know. There's so many good things that I could say about it, but it was incredible just to be a part of that for the time that it was going.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
And it's in that context you bump into the Vineyard.
Yes. That is exactly what happened. We moved to Texas, start working for Teen Mania, and two of our friends, our best friends at the time, were going to a Vineyard Church there in Tyler, Texas. And they were like, you have to come to our church. And the funny thing is that we had been in one Vineyard Church before. We loved Vineyard music. I mean, had all the CDs, all the Winds of Worship. We loved Vineyard worship, but we had been to one Vineyard Church that was just like weird.
Right.
I won't name any names, but it was just...
Wait a minute. Are you saying that there's Vineyard churches that are weird?
I would never say that, Jay.
Okay, good. Okay, because that's shocking.
It was just even for me, growing up in a Baptist environment.
You've seen weird.
We have seen lots of weird.
Right.
And I think really that again was kind of like, we don't want any more weird. We're done with weird. Anyway, we come to this church, and the moment we walked in, it was like we found our home, we found our tribe. Our pastor, we kind of like initial conversation said, this is what we're coming from. We were very burnt out on church ministry at that point. We had, at the church we grew up in, I was the worship leader. Joel was the youth pastor. We did everything. I mean, the pastor who was aging, he would call Joel like on a Saturday night and say, I don't feel good. Can you come preach on Sunday? And he'd have like one night to put something together. We would open the church and close the church. We cleaned the church. We were so overwhelmed and burnt out on, we left that church when we moved to Texas saying like, if this is what ministry is, we want nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So we ended up at the Tyler Vineyard, very brief, just like, hey, this is what we're coming out of. And our pastor looked at us and he said, you know what, like sit on the back row, like don't sign up for anything. Sign up for a small group, but don't sign up to lead anything. Don't sign up to serve like for a year. We just want you to rest and receive. And even just to hear that line, rest and receive, was such a paradigm shift for us. Like we had never been offered that. And so I don't even think we made it through a year because the church was just so amazing that we couldn't wait. We could not wait to hop in. And so
it's so interesting because, I mean, again, I know where your story goes, but even in the sort of, man, we're doing everything and we're burning out.
Yeah.
You look back and think, how was God prepping you even then? Right?
Yep.
I mean, like, you're just reacting and responding and doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
But you're getting really interesting training opportunities, right? I mean,
Very
you're thinking about buildings and groups and preaching on a whim and all of this stuff feels haphazard and chaotic.
Right.
But it's also opportunity. You probably are accelerating your ministry tools without even doing it on purpose, honestly. You're just, I don't know, I guess we have to do everything.
Right.
But it did lead to not a great spot. But then all those tools sort of rekindle in a space that's a little healthier. And so you start helping out at church and doing things. And then I want to ask you some questions about this window, but let's go all the way to the end, well, towards the end, and then we'll work backwards. So then you guys eventually end up planting a church.
Yep.
So how did you decide to do that?
Yeah.
Because, any number of folks, when they listen to things like this, are going, how would I know if God's speaking to me? There's so many people that would have some version of the story you told to this point, right? Like, I'm in my church. I love my church.
Yeah.
I help out. I do this. Hey, I may have done a little too much at one point.
Yeah.
I scaled back, and now I'm just kind of found a rhythm where I'm helping with ministry.
Yeah.
How in the world then do you decide we're going to plant a church?
Yeah, that was definitely a journey. We were heart and soul at Teen Mania, but I would say like the whole time we knew there was a very strong passion for the local church, even though we were very involved in a parachurch ministry. But there was that piece never left either of us, just a strong, passionate love for the local church. And so we didn't know what that would mean for us in the future. We were, in our 20s at the time, and we didn't know what necessarily God would ever call us to. I mean, we would kind of daydream and imagine. I mean, we would think like maybe we'll join someone's staff, and maybe we'll take over succeed someone. Church planning scared us, so that we knew that was an option, but we never really would breach that conversation to really consider it. And one day, Pastor Andy at the Tyler Vineyard had told Joel, "Hey, Joel, I think you're supposed to plant a church." And Joel's first response was, "You're smoking crack." And
so he just sight unseen. You've never had a conversation about it, but he's watching you do ministry.
Yeah.
He just says, "What if God asked you to plant a church?" You're like, "Nah, no thanks."
That's too hard. That was just kind of a passing conversation, and never really again consider it for a while. We were again kind of stepping up in leadership as time went on, and we were on what we called the pastoral team. I would assume it would kind of be like an elder team, and around that time, VLI became an option, and we had some students at the church. So Joel decided, maybe if I do VLI, this will kind of help direct us in what we're supposed to do. And so Joel went through VLI, and he did the intensive with Steve Nicholson on church planting. And he came home from that and he said, I've just been in a wrestling match with God for the last 2 days. And he's like, we're supposed to plant a church.
Wow.
So Steve sold him on church planting. The moment that Joel came home and said that to me, everything within me, it felt completely right. And yes and amen. Let's go. Let's do this.
Wow.
So then we just started a process of, imagining where. And of course, we first start just dreaming our dream locations. We left Virginia saying we probably would never be back to Virginia. So we're like, Miami Beach. And then we actually considered Colorado.
Oh, that's a good option. Yeah, there's still time.
Pass. Excuse me. We actually did consider Colorado very strongly. We had friends that worked at Compassion, and we were really weighing that as an option. What changed for us was when I had my second child, Caleb, I almost passed away in childbirth. And I was in ICU for 2 days, and they had already started to write up my death paperwork. Like, it was a done deal. Like, I was going to die. And then I was miraculously healed. All the doctors, specialists that had come in, and they said, there's no reason why you should be living right now.
Wow.
So we go through this miraculous experience. My parents came in to basically take care of us for a month. And we just came to this realization. We knew we were planting a church. And here we have 2 little babies, newborn and a 2-year-old. And we just, like, the way our parents aided us in that time, we felt like we can't plant a church without our family nearby. And all of our family was back in Virginia. So, the more we began to pray about it, while we had these dreams of like, this location would be so amazing, at the same time, we discerned that we know Virginia. We know, the commuter lifestyle. We know the transiency. We understand, that we have a lot of military bases. We understand that whole, we've pastored those people before. We've pastored their kids. We know, like, the strain and the stresses. And so we came to the point where we felt discerning that, we need to go home. And so, that's how we ended back in Virginia to plant Crossroads.
And did you move with a team? Like, did folks that you had known and no, okay, you just start laughing.
That classic, Vineyard Church plants. Like, here's a check for $2,000 and, good luck, go for it. Yeah. So we had our family. Our family was our starting. We started with a small group of 8, which consisted of my 2 parents, Joel's mom, my 2 sisters, and a family friend. That was our original group. And so we met for a year to plan. And then the next year we did 4 preview services. We followed the whole Cersei model, which worked like to the T. We did exactly what he said to do. And we did it. And we had 4 preview services once a month. And by the opening launch Sunday, we had 103 people show up.
Wow.
So we started with 8.
So you start with 8. You're in small group. Now, I assume you had to work jobs while you're doing that.
Yeah.
So you go back to work, do whatever you have to do.
Yep.
You're slowly doing some gathering stuff, getting to know friends of friends and folks. Then you do 4 preview services.
Yep.
It's like, hey,
this is who we are. This is what we want. We're starting a church. Come join us.
Maybe you want to come.
Yeah.
Okay. And then 100 people.
Yep.
A year later, just pile into a school.
We were our first launch Sunday was at a local Christian high school.
Wow.
And
you guys walk out of there going, I cannot believe
we couldn't.
This is happening.
And each preview service would grow. We went, from our 8 to 16 to like 20 something to 30 something. We ended up with 50. According to this model, we had these 50 people. And we said, all right, you are now our launch team. So we just divvied out all the roles and launched the next Sunday, and we had a church.
So how in the world did you bump into Cersei? How does that become the playbook? You just knew somebody?
It was a mistake, to be honest. We literally had no idea. We had, our church planning book that the Vineyard gave out at the time. Which was definitely helpful. Thank you, Steve Nicholson. But we I just, I'm just like, whatever books are out there. I mean, I read Ralph Moore, Hope Chapel.
How to Start a Church.
Yep.
And that was called?
I can see the cover.
Yeah, I can too. Yeah. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah.
I love that book too.
Yeah, totally. So that, and then somehow we just we found the Circe books. And when wait,
hold on. So, yeah, somehow we found it. But what's interesting is...
I don't even know how we found them.
So sight unseen, like, I don't know who this guy is.
Yeah.
I don't know. He wrote these books. They tell you, like, do these things in order.
Yep.
Let's just run the plays.
Yeah.
Because somebody says... who knows? Maybe it's in the Amazon. If you like this book, you'll like this book.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't even know. That might be how we got those books.
If you like Ralph Moore, you'll also like Nelson Circe.
That actually might be how we found those books. This is what I'll say is, we spent a year trying to gather for those of you who are, you're newer to church planning, this was the language we used back then, is you start a small group and you try to gather people and bring them into that small group, and then the small group grows and you break that off into 2, and before you know it, you have 100 people and you can start a church.
Yep.
We had a small group of 8 for an entire year, and we did everything we could to get people to come to our church.
Now that's fascinating. So what you're saying is, in the time that you're thinking, we'll go from the 8 to 50 or whatever, you go from 8 to 8.
Right. Yep. Exactly. And here's the thing is that, and I don't know if this is a regional thing, but the best example is we would have these amazing conversations everywhere. Joel had a conversation with our banker. He's opening a banking account, and he gives her a word of knowledge, and she starts crying right there in the bank.
Wow.
And they ended up talking for quite some time. And then he invited it to come to our small group.
Wow.
All of a sudden, there was a wall. Like, something about inviting a stranger to your house was just weird. And
it's too much. It's a cult.
Yeah, we got no traction.
Yeah, when we started planting, it was like same kind of deal. We have a team of folks, and when you said, "Hey, come to our church thing," it was this white, rickety house. It was like on a hill that all the dudes lived in. It was the only place we could really gather. And it was always that moment, even as I was doing it, even as I'm saying out loud, hey, you should check out our thing. It's on whatever, Wednesday night. And then they'd be like, oh, really? Where? Well, there's this white house right there off like 67th. And they'd be like, you could just see it in their eyes, like something turned. Like, because even people that don't have any church background, life with Jesus, they at least have some kind of an imagination, right?
Yeah.
Like a church is like a building and a place with like parking and lights and stuff. It's not some house,
right?
You know, so that is tough. Okay, so you go from 8 to 8.
Yep.
Then you start.
It was very discouraging. So I'm reading all these books, and this is what we felt even with our team, because they're going, okay, you're teaching us all this stuff about planting a church, but like nothing's happening.
We've been talking about planting a church.
Yeah.
The 8 of us.
Right. And here we still are.
That's so great. But you just jump anyway. You just go, you know what?
Yeah. So
whatever.
It felt, this is great for all of you church planners out there. We felt like that we were Noah building the ark with no sign of rain. And this is what we were trying to convince her. It's coming, guys. Like, the people are coming. Let's keep planning.
Well, like, you guys are in the room going, it's coming. And then you walk out, get in your car and go, is it coming?
Right.
Is it
100%.
Is this really real? Okay.
Yep. So we get to this point where we're like, hun, this isn't working. Like, nobody's showing up to this. And so this is where Circe comes in. And then the church planning book, and the name of it is, I'm having a hard time with book names right now.
That's right.
But I read the book, and I gave it to Joel, and I said, I think this is it. I think this is what we need to do.
Wow.
So he read it, and then we literally did step by step what he said. And
it's interesting what he said. So when you get the 100 or the 50, there's a clear plan to break people into assigned roles with how you sort of build those relationships, what you get them to do. That becomes a team. Whereas often I think what we think to ourselves is, well, I've got to get the exact right people.
Right.
Then I get a team. Then I do the next thing. You're saying, nope, we got some people.
Yep.
We made them into
kids,
our team.
You're in the nursery.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we got people. You're our team. Here's the things we know we have to get done. We'll work with what we've got.
Yep.
Wow, that's quite an insight. And it's an interesting, because part of what I want to pivot toward is how leadership development works and what it means to equip the saints and to train folks and how discipleship works. My hunch is, to that point, that's not been a model for you. Like, it doesn't sound like your own story is I was a part of a church plant and somebody just sort of threw me in. Though in one sense it was. It sounds like the Baptist Gospel Church, you were behaving like church planters, even if you weren't.
Yeah.
You were doing everything. So tell a little bit, because then I want to zoom forward from there, but I want to go back for just a second. Talk a little bit about, how did you get discipled in what you've done in ministry? How were you trained? Like, who were the people that took an interest in Christina? It sounds like this one pastor in Tyler, Texas, has some things.
Yep.
Probably some folks in Teen Mania. Maybe at even the church way back when, when you're doing wheelbarrow races and stuff. Who were the folks that noticed you, helped train you, and how did they do that?
Yeah. Well, very interesting. I would say, Joel and I both have we would consider him a spiritual father. He was an associate pastor at the church we grew up in for a couple of years, and that relationship never died. We're still good friends with him. And so I would say to that, though, for me as a girl, I honestly can't say that anyone ever spotted me out and said, you've got something on you. Other than, I was a worship leader. So, people would say, there's an anointing on you, and they would kind of comment on that. But I wouldn't say that anyone, until we got to the Tyler Vineyard, where leadership was seen in me, and I was kind of pushed forward into that.
Interesting.
And, growing up, my observation was my pastor and his wife were totally co-pastors in every sense of the word, but she wasn't called a pastor. They did not believe women should be ordained or in leadership over men.
Right.
Like, when I think back to what she did, in every sense of the word, she was a pastor. Even into, I would say, even into my young 20s, I just had this mentality: if I want to be in ministry or leadership, I need to marry a pastor. I need to marry someone that's going to be in ministry.
Interesting.
And that probably didn't shift for me until I was at the Tyler Vineyard.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're floating around ministry. There's theological convictions against women being pastors, but you're watching women be pastors, even if we don't call them pastors.
Right.
But so you have some models. There's like some frameworks. Then in the Vineyard, they're like, you're a leader. You're a pastor.
Yeah.
So there's some hurdles to jump there. Then you guys build your church plant team from 8 to 8, then launch with the 50, put those people in play. Okay, so what's so interesting about your story then is because I do know, again, more of your story, the church really grows. So you have this thing that launches.
Yeah.
You're both kind of shocked. I can't believe this is happening. And then it just starts to scale up.
Yeah.
It starts to grow.
Very slow and steady.
So let's talk about that.
We do not have that story that you hear sometimes where they're like, I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
200 people showed up out of nowhere. Like, that never happened to us. It was a very slow, incremental growth. We honestly, and I think when we moved into, we were portable for 9.5 years. And when we moved into our building, that was a time that we did have
But 9.5 years.
9.5 years of maybe 25 this year and, 50 the next year and 30 the next year. And it was just a very slow, it took us 9 years. We grew to about 400 people.
But it was substantial.
Yeah,
church,
it was a very slow. We never felt like, wow, look at all these people. It just was, you almost didn't notice the growth unless you're looking at numbers. So
100 to 400 is just, and I assume at this time you're still sort of running certain kinds of plays. Like, we do the newcomer class, and then we keep building small groups, and we multiply small groups, and we have some kind of vineyard process class, right? Like they
101, 201, all that stuff.
Okay, so you're doing all that for 9 years, just every day, day in, day out, working the system, doing the process. people slowly are inviting their friends. That's how they come.
Yep.
You bring them to the newcomer, invite them to the one-on-one, two-on-one, come
Yep.
to small group, serve in a ministry, blah, 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 blah. That's all just going on for 9.5 years. Wow.
Yep.
Faithfully.
Yes. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what would you want to say? I mean, there's lots of people that I think get discouraged. You know, their church is 100 people, it stays 100 people. It's 100 people, and then it's 120 people.
Yeah.
We've already talked to the people who build their team that goes from 8 to 8.
Right.
Then 100 to 120, or 125 to 135, 140 people, or whatever. How did you guys just keep going? How did you just keep doing it? And I imagine in that time, how many of the original 100 stayed all the way through till the building by and 9.5 years later?
Very few, actually.
Right.
Our family.
So the eight were
The
strong.
8 were strong. Yeah. I mean, my parents actually, they don't live very close. So they ended up, it was
Doing
just,
something
they're
else.
older. And so, yeah, they ended up at one point heading out.
But even of that original launch,
Mm-hmm.
those people are sort of cycling off. You're cycling in.
Yes.
It's steady.
Yes.
It's slow.
Yep.
How did you just keep? I'm sure there's discouraging windows in there,
Oh,
like
for sure.
so and so's not coming, and what happened? How do you guys just keep
Yeah.
running the place?
Oh, goodness. We were at our second regional conference with the Vineyard, and we just had a kind of a blow up with a married couple who she led the kids area and he led the youth. I won't go through the whole story, but it was a betrayal, and they ended up leaving. And so we're at our regional conference. At the time, Phil Strout was our regional leader, and we're just kind of telling him what happened. And he just looked us in the eyes and he said, "You guys need to learn to have a soft heart and tough skin." Soft heart and tough skin. That statement never left us. And the other thing that he had said is that you need to learn to hold people with open hands. And so what that means, and if you could see me right now, I've got my hands open with my fingers spread. And when you hold people with open hands, they will slip out a lot easier. You're not holding on tight to them where it's going to hurt both you and them when it's time for them to move on. And so that image as well has always been very foundational for us, because it is true that people that you love deeply will leave you. They will. They'll leave. And, you know, interestingly enough, in the early years of the church, I was working as an event planner. So I was a corporate event planner. I was at a doctor's continuing education.
Just event, like
A thing, yeah. So it's where they get their re-up on their certification stuff.
Okay.
This was the orthopedic one. And so, you know, most of it is like way over my head, but I still remember this one thing that the orthopedic instructor had said. He said, "The skeleton that you have right now will be a completely new skeleton in 10 years. That there is this regeneration that happens. The dead cells fall off and new cells are always regenerating. So you will have a completely different skeleton in 10 years. And something like it just hit me like a ton of bricks. That's what church really is. Like there are dead cells that fall off and there are new cells always regenerating. And so kind of those metaphors have kept us, you know, hanging on when that we've
It's tough,
walked through
man.
some really painful. You know, there was one, you know, I know a lot of church planters are young and have young families. And there was a year, actually, I will say a week. In 1 week, we had 3 of our core families leave. 2 of them were moving away and 1 decided to leave the church. All of their kids, these are 3 families where all of their kids were best friends with our kids.
Wow.
So in 1 week, our kids lost all of their friends.
Their kids' ministry friends.
Yes,
yeah.
all
Yeah.
of their friends. And that was kind of a like, what are we doing? Do I really want to put my kids through this? Like seriously? And so, yeah, there are very painful, you won't get around that. It's going to happen. So there's a resilience that's needed.
Yeah.
And a determination and an eye on the prize.
Each quarter on the We Are Vineyard podcast, we will focus in on a theme for all of our interviews. For the first quarter of 2022, the theme is Equipping the Saints. And every month, we're going to introduce a new recommended book or resource to dig in deeper. This month, we're recommending that everyone reads Strong and Weak by Andy Crouch. Later this month, we'll interview Andy to hear a deeper dive on this book and much more. Strong and Weak is available through Vineyard Resources and wherever books are sold.
It's interesting to hear the timing of Phil Strout's thing. You know, so our story is not that different. You know, we didn't grow very quickly, steady incremental growth. But one of the key moment for us was also in a regional experience. Rick Olmsted was our regional guy, and I remember sitting with him and just going, "Man, it's just painful because, you know, we're not an NFL team. You know, where you trade players, their contracts run out or something. We're not a business where I'm running a restaurant where a server gets a better job or something. I thought I was building family. I thought we were building a way of life together in obedience to Jesus. And there were people we'd seen baptized and dedicate their kids. And sometimes just for the most mundane, like, I don't know, we just live like 4 blocks away now, or there's some new church that popped in nearby. I mean, it was often just odd stuff where what was clear to me was whatever I thought we were doing, they didn't necessarily think we were doing. It felt a little more like Chili's changed the fajitas, so I'm not coming back to Chili's or whatever. And it was gutting. It was painful. And I remember sitting with Rick Olmsted and kind of saying this. And he gave me really good advice, which is similar to yours, which is, he said, Jay, the whole key, he goes for longevity of ministry, not spurts of ministry. There's all kinds of little tools and things you learn, but for longevity of ministry, every time you say goodbye, you have to choose to say hello. And he said, the pastors I watch, they get stuck. Like they kind of just get stuck in themselves in the life of their church. They've said goodbye so many times that it's hard to keep saying hello. Because every time, Jay, there's another group of people nearby. There's a friend of a friend that you have to be able to turn and say hello again.
So true.
And make disciples and pray for them and talk through the Bible and care for their family. And if you can keep saying hello as many times as you say goodbye, in your own heart, know that I can only pastor the people God has entrusted me. You can do this a really long time.
Wow, so good.
If you can't, it's death by paper cuts.
100%.
It's bad betrayal. Sometimes there's really bad ones, but it's often just kind of people do their own thing. They go away. They do something else. Sometimes they just move, right? They get jobs. They're just like, I'm going to go somewhere else.
I mean, look at what we're in right now.
Yes.
This is like what you just described, but in a...
COVID. Man.
I mean, we are out of church for 3 months, at least in our area, and come back, and it's like, where did everybody go? Like, I thought we were their pastors. Do we still pastor them? Like,
totally.
There was no like notes. There was no like Dear John letters. There was nothing. And they're just gone. And and even right now you look around and wow, we've said hello to a lot of new people.
Yes. And it's hard. Because you inside of your mind and your heart still grieve. I know so many pastors are more aware of who's not there than who's there.
Yep.
And so that's a mental heart shift. Like, well, there are these people.
Right.
Let's do this part. Okay, so you guys go into the building, and just to speed forward, because I want to talk a little bit about how your role is informed by your story, because many of the things you're saying help you be an incredible person thinking about church health. So you guys move into a building. Church starts to grow because you have a big building that's cool and people are excited. It's in the middle of the
city, like
so you
city
kind of
center.
Shift to the center, so now you're exposure a different way. Church starts to grow, but it applies the growth, the thing you've always wanted, applies a whole new set of pressure on you and Joel and on some of your key team.
Yes.
And it starts to create some fissures. There's some mess that appears. Talk through that briefly. I mean, we could talk about that for hours, but just give me like the 10,000 foot view.
Yeah. So I don't think you can prepare for, 200 people showing up in a quick amount of time, which is what happened to us. And, like every pastor in America, like, of course, you don't have enough volunteers to handle that. Packing out kids services. There were some that we were like, we might have to close the kids area because we just, so we had decided to open a third service, which means that a lot of our current volunteers who just went through a big traumatic, like, church move. I mean, that's a big deal when you go from having something for 9 years and then you're in a different environment. And there's just a lot of, it's a very odd, even though it's a better situation on paper, like there's a lot of hard things that are going on in that time.
It's true. Every single change, even good change, produces loss.
Right.
And I think we always undercalculate what the cost is for people.
Yes.
Great change, really great change, still has a lot of loss.
Yes.
And it's sort of under the surface, you know, because even in your own mind, you have cognitive dissonance, like, but look at this and this cool thing. Right. And then you feel sadness and you're like, what's wrong with me? And you try to push through. Yeah. But that sense of loss does stay with you.
Yes.
And it will show up one way or another.
Yes.
Because growth also means for you as a pastor, many people who were really connected to you are now feeling a little further away from you.
100%.
So that creates cost too. Okay, so you're growing.
Quick growth. We add a service. People are getting toasty. Just, hey, I've
serving
served
all the time
every week in the kids area for the past month.
Right.
People are getting toasty, but, I feel like we had a really strong vision and what this meant to be in the city center. Our former location was in the middle of nowhere. And now that we're here, like, look, we felt that we had a very strong vision, and I think people were attracted to that. And we were just really struggling to get what we learned, and we wouldn't have known this on the front end, is that all of those new people, it usually takes almost a year for them to plug in, to start serving, to start tithing. So they're literally dead weight. Those 200 people that just showed up out of nowhere are dead weight. And so, the core team, they're getting toasty, but the unhealth of this was that they weren't telling Joel and I.
Right.
And so there began to be some undercurrents that we were completely unaware of. Unless you've been through this, when I hear myself telling this story, it's like, well, how could you not be aware? Like, are you not talking to them? Are you not meeting with them? Are they not seeing me? And I'm just saying, like, no, like we really were unaware of the degree of their I don't know what word to use, but just
frustrated.
Frustrated, yeah.
Because they're working hard. Yeah. They've loved the church. And in some point, whether they want to admit it or not, they love the church because they love you guys. I imagine as the 200 people are trying to figure out, is this our church? You're dedicating a lot of time and energy to new folks.
Yep. Yeah.
So folks that have been around a while are going, man, they're not as accessible as they used to be. We don't feel as connected because we're all working so hard. And that starts to just create some irritation.
Yep. Some irritation, which can lead to some cynicism. Are the Lowerys building their fame on our backs? Yeah. Are they building a big church at our expense? Yep. And so, some of that cynicism really, it was an undercurrent that we were the emperor with no clothes at that point.
And you've done, needless to say, we just said it quickly, but you've done a ton of work to get in the building. People forget how much work it is to raise money and do plans and get building codes to just get in. And I've been in your building. It's a beautiful building. So it's a lot of work. So you guys are also a little tired. Yeah. People who've worked with you are a little tired.
Tired is an understatement. Right. We were exhausted. We were exhausted,
And so the cool, great new thing requires more work. So you're exhausted on top of exhausted. We're painting a really beautiful picture of church growth, aren't we? Okay,
right? I know.
Because it's important to talk this honestly, though, because everybody who's in a church that really loves Jesus, loves their church, loves the city is like, man, what if we could grow? Yeah. Very few people count the cost of the work required and how the work changes.
Yes, yeah.
And because then the work changes, and then all the relationships change. And you've got to tell a story somehow.
Yep.
What's the story I tell about what's happening right now? And you're saying,
Right.
now looking back, you were more tired than you thought you were. The groups are becoming cynical, and you weren't even aware to
Right.
address it.
Yeah. And I should mention this too, is that I think with best intentions, our staff felt like they needed to be a buffer between what was really the rumblings. And then, so even in that, there was a sense of betrayal as some of this started to unfold. Like, you've known about all of this and you haven't told us. Like,
well, and they thought they were being helpful.
And they thought they were, thought they were protecting us.
Right. So it all breaks.
And
how does it break?
Explodes.
Like, I mean, you don't have to go, again, 10,000 feet.
Yeah. 2 of our best friends in the church, both in very significant leadership roles in the church, had been with us for 8 years at that time. We'd vacationed together. I mean, it was that kind of relationship. We had kids around the same time. We've been through a lot. We've even relationally had some really difficult experiences. But to Joel and I, we felt like this was kind of like the height of our friendship with them.
Right.
Again, just to make everything really short, it turns out that they were kind of the instigators of this unrest and this cynicism, and coming to find out that this was happening at the same time as they're hanging out with us and doing dinners, and at the same time they're like having these fun nights with us and hanging out. They're also having dinners with other people and sowing seeds of distrust towards Joel and I. It all came out in 1 week, and the way that I found out is just the way Joel and I found out is just one after one. We were approached by different leaders in the church, and for some reason they all were saying the exact same things, word for word. So just using, tracing all the things they were saying, we discovered that it was coming from this couple. And
then you try to engage, intervene, but it just spins out of control.
It spun out of control.
Right.
Again, this is so, the more I'm telling my story, the more I see how much the Vineyard has really been so incredibly instrumental in not just launching us, but preserving us. We called up our regional leaders, Andy and Sharon Mead. They were alarmed immediately. They took off on their day off. Monday was their day off, and they came up, drove 3 hours to get to us. And they just said, your ship is on fire. And if we don't do something right now, your ship is going to sink. I know that you have a full church on Sunday, but there are enough core team members that are involved in this that if we don't address this right now, it's going to sink. Those two, honestly, they saved us. We were so heartbroken and deer in the headlights, not knowing what to do, because of course we want to fix everything, but they stepped in and kind of took over for us and handled it in the best way that needed to happen. It was a very, very, very painful experience. Probably one of the worst things that Joel and I have ever been through. But they were able to get the cancer out, and we survived.
So a whole chunk of folks just sort of together leave, these friends?
No, at first it was just the one
2.
couple, but over the next couple months, one by one. There's a leak out. They leak out.
And just because I know the story, I get to cheat and push it forward. That process puts Joel in a new spot. All of a sudden he's going, do I want to do this? So we've been through all these difficult things. We finally get to the moment we're trying to do the thing we thought we could do. It's actually working. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted on top of exhausted on top of exhausted. Now these people we've been giving our life to are gone. People are leaking away. I don't know that I want to do this. And you've been leading together. And he decides, I got to get out of this.
And he didn't come right out and say, I've got to get out of this. It was kind of like I need to discern if I'm supposed to be a pastor for the rest of my life.
Which sounds fair. In light of what he's been through. Right.
Yeah. And again, in the context, you have a capital campaign leading into a building project, which statistically
kills you.
Pastors quit all the time after those two things.
All the time.
So, and he was already like beyond done at that point. So for this to happen, it was like, I don't know if I want to like do this.
Right.
So yeah, he decided to take a 3-month sabbatical and discern during that time. And like looking back, that 3 months, his decision happened pretty quickly. I mean, he'd be like, all right, I'm at 50% of this is it. And then 2 weeks later, I'm at 85%.
Right.
This is done. So at that point, let's see, he took the sabbatical. It was in 2019, January to March. And the whole time I'm having a massive crisis of belief myself.
How could you not?
I mean, we've both been through that betrayal together.
Right.
We have, way too many people and not enough volunteers. And we're still trying to figure out how to work all of that. In my heart, I just knew that we had to get through this because this is the dream we've always had. Like this is everything in our life has led up to this moment. Why, like we can't just quit. And in my mind at the time, I thought if Joel quits, I have to quit too. They would never take me as their pastor, or all the feelings of like you have all these excuses. I'm a woman. No one wants to be led by a woman. And again, these are just the thoughts that are going through my mind.
Well, and again, however tired he is, you're tired. So the thought that, okay, now we're going to cut the work team in half and do more. Yeah. Like what person agrees to that?
Right.
Like,
we're married, so we balance each other out.
Exactly.
There are things that he's amazing at that I'm horrible at, and vice versa. So to think I'm a half of the deal. And we started this church together, and we were supposed to, die in this church kind of thing. But I'm just watching him sink fast, and I'm freaking out. And to be really honest, that was a really rough patch for us as a couple.
How could it not be?
And so I'm mad at him.
You don't just skip through the fields of those conversations. Those are painful.
Very, very painful.
Yeah.
And I felt abandoned. And so there's much healing that comes past this point. But at this point, it was very hard. And I kind of had it out with God one night. I was mad at Joel and I was mad at God. Like when I say mad, I was just beside myself, angry, so mad that this was happening. And it's kind of funny, if you've been walking with the Lord for some time, it was one of these kind of conversations where I'm ranting for probably an hour. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I stopped to take a breath, and I literally, I hear the Lord say, "Are you done?" And I kind of sobbing at the same time, and I say, "Yes, I'm done.
I guess I am."
Yeah,
right?
I guess so, for now.
Wow.
His response to my rant was a question. And he said, "Christina, did I call you to plant this church?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Would you pastor this church with or without Joel?" And I knew in that moment he was looking for an obedient answer. I knew this wasn't like a rhetorical question. Right. He was looking for obedience. And so I told him, "God, if this is what you want, I will pastor this church without Joel."
What a moment.
It was.
And to fast forward, because we talk, again, any piece of this, we talk for hours.
Yeah.
Joel does decide, I'm stepping away.
Yeah.
You guys try to work out the best you can for you. Mm-hmm. And then you step in.
Yep.
And here's what's so interesting, because I know the story. Many of the things you were afraid of happened the way that you were afraid of them. Like, well, you're a woman. I don't know what I think about that. Even though you had been a pastor, now that you are the lead person, a whole bunch of people just go, sorry, can't be here. So there's more leaking. Yep. However, a whole little chunk of your team rally around you. And in this window, you hold the church steady. Yep. It begins to sort of grow back.
This is the interesting piece. We lost attendance numbers, but our discipleship numbers went up. So we had about 200 less people.
So the crowd from before
kind of dissipated.
Right.
And that year we had more salvations in the history of our church. We had more baptisms that year in the history of our church. More people involved in small groups and all of this. So, yeah,
it's amazing.
It is. It's just to think that we lost people, but yet
gained overall.
Gained for sure. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because, when I came out and met with you guys and we've talked through this, I'm hearing a theme in how you've done ministry where, okay, so we bump into Nelson Searcy stuff that we've never met. We run the Malfmore playbook. even in that window, you just fall back into how do we do the right things in order, really intentionally, keep turning the wheel, keep being faithful, just like you did when you grew from 100 people to going into a building. What's so amazing about your leadership and what even God did in that window is he honored your faithfulness. So Joel backs up, gets his head straight, and of course, to not leave people in too much suspense, he does come back.
Yes.
You guys repair all kinds of components, now pastoring in the church. I mean, but even if it hadn't worked out that way, thank God it did. But in the in-between time, part of what you did was just lean back into the faithfulness of God and faithful ways of pastoring. So it wasn't a moment for some kind of big pivot. You know, hey, let's redo the vision of the church or new logo or, you know.
Relaunch it,
relaunch. You know, we're going to start again. It's like, no, okay, we're just going to do the stuff we know how to do in order, steadily, and God honor it. Now, you had loss. But part of your story listening to you is, man, even in loss, you've just been faithful over and over and over. And God continues to honor that, which makes you the perfect person to lead at this moment in the vineyard with church health. Because so much of what pastors need to do coming out of COVID in a place where they feel like their church has been stuck for a while is not, what's tempting to do is some new magical trick. We're going to rebrand. We're going to get a different logo. We're going to whatever. We're going to build a new building. We're, you know, whatever we're going to do. And maybe God would ask you to do some of those things. But by and large, that's not what happens. That's not what works. It's steady yourself. Do the simple things again. How do we preach the gospel? We call people into life with Jesus. We make disciples. We train leaders. And we just run the plays, even if a bunch of folks aren't there or are walking away. So say more about that, because, you know, as we move into this moment in the vineyard, you have a resume that proves if you are faithful and you get help. That's the other thing. You weren't trying to be creative. You didn't get out a piece of paper and go, what is discipleuship? You're like, you know, you're like, okay. And I know some of your stories. So some of the ARC folks have been helpful to you.
Super helpful.
You know, you relied on regional leaders to be helpful to you. So there's not like this sort of hero complex. There's people that know what to do. I'm going to run some plays. As people are saying goodbye, we're going to keep saying hello. When you think about the vineyard as a whole, I mean, this would be a good way to sort of wrap up. What are the sort of plays that you think, man, we've got to get pastors to be thinking about? From my own experience, from what I'm watching churches go through some of your education, you're
Yes, I'm almost done.
You're almost done? So what was your degree again?
Ministerial leadership.
Ministerial leadership. Okay, so down the line of what we're talking about, what are some of the things you're just like, you know, if pastors could just think about 2 or 3 things, regardless of the size of their church, about themselves or about things they're doing in their church, what kinds of things would you just say, here's how you just turn the wheel. Here's how you do the simple things.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've, in our local expression, we've really had to beat this drum for us, like as the pastors, because again, we literally are looking at almost a new congregation than pre-pandemic.
And that's pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. We've got a good core that stuck it out, but we are looking at a new congregation. So this is like it is almost like a church plant. In fact, we're even having to re-vineyardize this new crowd, you know, like to bring in some of those things. But for us, it has been, we need to pastor well the people that are right in front of us. And there is the temptation to constantly think about who's not here anymore. Or who hasn't been here in a month, or who, you know, if I just do this, then we can get them back. This is probably the number one thing, is to do it well, pastor well the people that you have right in front of you. We are coming back to this very relational, knowing people, knowing their stories, knowing their names, knowing, you know, that they're not just a part of the crowd. And one thing that's changed for us after COVID is that we are not green room pastors anymore. We're not sitting in some room in the back of the building. We're in the lobby. If we're not preaching, we're in the lobby.
Yep.
And we are meeting every person that we and we're getting to know them and remembering their names. And so I think I don't have like a
It's
super
not magic,
fancy,
is it?
it's not a
Totally.
super fancy
No, it
answer.
isn't. Well, you lead groups, you lead people,
Yep.
you train leaders, you reproduce leaders.
Yep.
Rich Nathan, the pastor of Columbus Vineyard, of course, he's a guy that
Who is that?
trained me.
No.
Yeah. I was always amazed, no matter how big the church was, he was always leading some kind of small group.
Mm-hmm.
Like Rich, if he didn't lead a small group, nobody would make him.
Yep.
I remember even when I was on staff there, he was leading a youth small group because he was like, I think I could just do this. I think that would be helpful and I could help build into some leaders. And it feels like our youth could use some help. And he would always lead like groups, like here's potential leaders. Let me meet with them on a Saturday morning and we'll talk through things. So what's interesting about him, and I see it in you, I see it in every leader that goes through hard times and or is in a steadily growing church, they themselves keep running the simple plays of discipleship.
Yeah.
Then they're asking their key leaders to run the simple processes of discipleship, a small group, a class, meals, lots of meals, dinners in their homes, dinners in your home. One of the things in the Bible that the elders have to be hospitable.
Yeah.
It's such a strange thing in the New Testament because things happen around a meal where you create connection, you create impact.
Yes.
That in this moment, it might be an opportunity for the church to remember who we've always been intended to be.
Yep.
Leaders that disciple one another, are connected. It could be, I've heard more than one kind of church analyst say, we might be seeing the end tail of the celebrity pastor phenomenon in our culture because COVID broke
it.
some of that.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know. I think the tail's probably a bit longer because we still like flashy stuff. But that's sort of the emulating for that, that local pastors are like, man, what if I could just be like that person?
Yep.
That illusion has been broken.
Right.
And many pastors, like you're describing, are going, I remember why I got in this in the first place.
Yep.
It was to help people meet Jesus, to make disciples. And if our room is 30 people, 300 people, 3,000 people, 30,000 people, I want to do that.
Yep.
And I want to do that in a way that we keep reproducing leaders. And I've seen that in you, and I know that that's the way forward for the Vineyard.
Absolutely.
And I know you can help lead us in that.
Yeah.
Well, it was great to talk to you.
Thank you.
This was really, really helpful.
What an honor to be here.
Really encouraging. And there's any number of things we'll get to do on the way down the road, helping people think through church health. And I know we have coaching relationships, what we do with regions. We'll talk about all that down the line. But I'm just excited to have you on team. And your story offers opportunity to every kind of pastor and leader. And so I'm just so grateful you've taken this assignment. And just know, I just can't imagine what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years as we just help pastors and leaders remember why they got into this in the first place. So thanks for saying yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and love the Vineyard, as you can tell with my story.
No kidding. They show up over and over. I mean, your ability to say, I'm just going to keep asking for help. And hopefully everybody listening goes, maybe I'm not just supposed to do this alone. I'm supposed to be in a family.
That's right.
I'm supposed to get the help I need.
That's right. Yep. Thank you.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.